Hannibal was a trapper, a very respected trapper, but you kind of use that as a springboard for your career, correct?
Well, trapping, and when I was 9 years old, I caught a mink and wrote a little article, and they put it in the Blue Earth paper about trapping mink. I remember when I skinned my first muskrat down in the pump house out on the farm, section number 1, Blue Earth Township, and it took me 45 minutes, and it looked awful. The eyes were big, and it was just looked terrible. But after I skinned 10, 20,000 muskrat, I got it down to, my best time was 19 seconds. So. But it was crazy, and I did a lot of trapping and raccoon hunting with Sherwood Crush from Elmore, Minnesota. And the fastest I ever skinned a raccoon is in 90 seconds, and that would have been out in the woods with a flashlight in my mouth. And we'd have a swivel switch and hang it up in a tree. And I only beat Sherwood one time, but he went to University of Minnesota and had a butchering class, and he was really good with a knife. But that's the way that went anyway. So.
Well, and you have a good memory of certain things, and so do I. I remember I asked you, well, what kind of knives do you use? What brand?
Yeah, I use a Marvin Palmer knife out of Jackson, Michigan. I met him down in southern Indiana at the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association. That's a 10-day show that's held down there in June and September. And I still buy knives from his son, David Marvin Palmer. It holds an edge better than any other knife I've ever known.
So Hannibal, in my opinion, has been what you would call a rolling stone. Is that fair to say? You've been on the road forever, going to outdoor shows, trapping conventions, you name it.
Done a lot of different shows. One year I did 52 shows, one of every weekend, when Christmas and New Year's fell in the middle of the week. So now I'm way in my mid-80s, and I'm just down to I only do 40 shows a year now. So. And my wife retired from, she is a college professor and an art teacher in a grade school, and she retired and ran with me last summer for a few weeks, and she said never again. I about killed her, so I'm trying to keep up with me.
So let's go back to your youth, Hannibal, and one of the interesting things, you were a wrestler. Were you a wrestler before you injured your arm?
Well, I tried to wrestle boys and girls in grade school.
Yeah.
I could beat every boy, but not all the girls, you know. But when I was 11 years old, I fell 39 feet out of an elevator onto concrete, and I got about every bone in my body was broken. My skull was fractured. Dr. Baker came into the hospital, and my front teeth were about half an inch apart, and he just pushed my face back together, and he says, well, if we live, we'll do something about it later. So yeah, I spent 18 months in Rochester getting through that, because I got an osteomyelitis, a bone infection, and they almost amputated a couple limbs there, but I made it through there. And doctor said I'd never golf or wrestle again, but I proved them wrong anyway. My dad says there's no such thing as can't, so I endeavored to persevere.
You thrived.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, wrestled in Blue Earth and then at the University of Minnesota.
So from there, I recall seeing you at conventions, and we knew each other. I knew you more than you knew me, but you had bought fur in North Mankato. You'd go to the Hausers.
Yeah,
me and the Hausers.
1015 Center Street. And I bought fur out on the Cornish farm there, just south of Mankato, and West Cornish. and for I think 7 or 8 years, every Friday nights. And made different buying stops all in Austin, Elberly, all over southern Minnesota, and buying stations in northern Iowa. And my best friend, Larry Jonke, we called him Turtle Man. He was from Blue Earth. And he was my best man to my second wife, Robbie, 42 years ago. He's been deceased for 12 years now, but he would go on the road and buy fur for me in northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. He was a good fox trapper. I think I only beat him once, 1 year trapping fox. I caught 178 red fox, averaged over 1 per hour that year. I think that was in '77. Oh, he got very upset with me.
And that was high competition.
Yeah, he was
very high.
He was mostly Sioux. But I used a dirt hole set. I have a special way of doing it where I caught over 2/3 of my fox by the hind foot, and then they wouldn't spring and be able to pull loose. I had a little secret with using haul breakers, and I actually used coyote urine instead of fox urine, but we were coyote free at that time, but they seemed to be attracted by that. And most people told me that would scare them away, but I found out it was a very good attractor. But I had a fur shop in Wells run by Jim Prang, and I think it was '77. We had up 20 employees. And Sherwood Crush from Elmore was also skinning and stretching for me down there. And that year we bought 114,000 muskrats, so you had to have a very good banker at that time too.
So that would, if muskrats, if you were paying $5, that'd be $650,000.
We averaged over $6 a pelt then buying them. So.
Did you ever have a year that the market was not friendly to the fur buyer?
I never had a year that I lost money, but you had to be a mover and shaker, move fast sometimes if the price started going down. I'd make a lot of trips to Winnipeg. They had the fur auction up there then. I'd go through Pembina. My broker was H.A. and J.L. Woods up there, and sometimes I'd leave home at 2 o'clock, Blue Earth, Minnesota, at 2 in the morning, and I'd be back by 2 the next night, drive all the way through customs both ways, and then go into Winnipeg, drop furs off, buy stuff, and get home. Those are long days and long drives.
So at that time, it would have been, you were taking furs across the border.
Yes. Mm-hmm. One time from the fur tannery up there, International Fur Dressers, Mike ran it then, and I bought a couple barrels of skulls back from what he had up there, and I had them in the back of my van, and U.S. Customs didn't want to let me in. They said, "What's in the barrels?" I says, "Skulls," and they were all just bloody and just something else. Pull over here, and they said, got up and lit the lid up and looked in, and says, "You can dump them out if you want to." No, they said, "Get your ass out of here." So, okay, and I did. That'd have been a good way to smuggle in drugs, but I never did anything illegal, sir. I woke up in the morning and there was 6 inches of snow in my tent. And the next year I was there, it was 114 degrees, and I bought a loincloth. So, and I only wore it 2 days, and that was the last time I wore it. So I had too many women scream when they came into my booth, so. But at least I stayed cool. So.
Yeah. That's you definitely Hannibal. He dresses the part. He wears furs and hides, and but it gets a little harder when it's warm like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I took my bison vest off now. I will have that on this morning. I got shorts on today, so. But talking about kind of living kind of crazy, when Turtle Man, Larry Jonke, we used to go up bear hunting in Canada and just go out and sleep in the woods. And I only shot one. I shot 29 bear and only shot one over a bait, but we'd go up and spring bear hunt and shoot them out like in oats field or wheat field, or when they come out on grass slopes on the south side, just eating grass to get their metabolism going. And then the meat would be a lot better to eat in the spring from hibernating all winter. My wife Robbie and I had bear meat at our wedding 42 years ago, so no, we didn't tell anyone what they were eating, and half of them that are still alive still don't believe us that they ate bear meat. So
You showed me a picture yesterday of a Kodiak bear that you shot, and I'll get a picture of that.
yeah,
How many years ago was that?
it's been about 15 years ago.
So you were well into your 70s then?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not well into, but...
Yeah.
And that was I think you said 1,800 pounds?
Yes, it's sitting in Miss Kitty's right now in Deadwood. My wife told me I had to sell it, so, but it took up too much room, and she wouldn't let me bring it in. Couldn't get it in the door in the house, so it was sitting out in the warehouse. So. And when the wife says jump, I don't ask her how high. I
Sure.
just jump. So.
Yeah.
And we're still married to her too.
Yeah. So do you know how many miles you put on last year? Do you have any idea?
About 40,000, I suppose.
Okay.
I'm getting down. I used to put on 60, 70,000 back in the heydays, you know, so. Because just going to Winnipeg in one day, that's a lot of miles there, you know,
Yeah.
a couple thousand.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
So the trapping conventions are clearly not what they used to be, but the hunting conventions seem like they're thriving, the big game conventions.
Oh, and the gun shows.
Yeah.
Gun show in Sioux Falls last year, we had 3 different places there. I think I had 5 people working for me, but that was 1,500 tables out there, and people come from all over. The NRA convention, National Rifle Association convention, was there about 7 years ago. About 12 years ago, I sat up there, and the guy sitting next to me had a white hat, clear glasses, and a white beard, and I found out one day, and he was really like my cashews I was selling, and I found out it was Hank Williams Jr.
Really?
But couldn't even recognize him in disguise. So.
Well, that's a memorable one. All these shows. So if you're doing, let's say, 40 a year for the last 40 years, that's 1,600 shows. Yeah, and visiting with you, it's almost like, okay, so you're like 86, 85?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay, all right. It's like you don't think about it. You don't think about retiring or nothing.
Well, I want to keep going because a lot of my friends that retired aren't here now. We just lost another poker player, Dave Frank from Blue Earth, that was in our original poker playing club, and I saw Roger Fletcher. I was his campaign manager in Blue Earth for sheriff. Played a lot of poker for many years on the circuit down there with Earl Fletcher, his dad. But Roger just told me, he says, now we're the last 2. I just saw him last Wednesday in Blue Earth, that we're the last 2 survivors of the original 9-member poker playing team there from Blue Earth. We met every Wednesday and played there at different homes.
You told me that in college you didn't work at a job, you'd play poker for.
Yes, yeah.
And were they college people, or were they?
No, they did a lot of poker playing on the circuit in summer or whatever. And when I first got married to my first wife, I worked for Wooders Construction, building Interstate 35 as a cement finisher. And I'd play poker every winter. I didn't take unemployment, so then I'd someday I'd take a day off and she'd say, "Why aren't you out working?" Because I'd give her half of everything I made. You know, most of the time I did pretty good, but when I was 9 years old out at the golf course, the old sheriff there, Bill Matthews, gave me $5 and wanted me to sit down and play poker with the gang out there, and I made a little money. My dad never forgave him, but my dad never had a drink in his life and never gambled, so. But he was like me. When my mother said jump, he didn't say how high. My mother was 4'10", he was 6'4", and he weighed about 260 pounds. But then started playing poker a little bit. One time, Med Anderson stopped the school bus and come back. I was playing poker in the back with the guys, and the money I had made, he took it away from me and donated it to the Heart Fund. But yeah, this Roger Weitzman, a friend of mine, he was a Jewish boy, and I was at his house one night, and his dad came in and says, "We need poker players," and he gave each one of us $50. Sit down and play poker. I made a killing, so then they kept inviting me back. They could try and get their money back, but I did pretty good there. But they taught me a few tricks too. But I don't know if I'm deceitful or cunning, but I never call a hand or stay in if I know I can't beat them. And you only bluff about once every 2 weeks, just to keep people honest that you play with a lot. So.
What did your father do for a living?
My father was a farmer. Yeah, grew up. My mother and dad were married in 1899, so we go way, way back. Section number 1 in Blue Earth. My grandfather was mayor of Blue Earth at one time and a banker there, Mike Hayes. But during the Depression, he lost all his money. So, but he didn't commit suicide anyway. But it was a bad deal. So that's when my dad didn't like gambling. And then when I started buying stocks, we'd go into the White House Cafe, and Bud Martin would show me the Wall Street Journal and get me interested in stock buying. So then I'd start buying stock, like local stuff, like Green Giant stock, Winnebago stock. I'd buy Winnebago stock when it got down to $6-7, and when it got up to 12 or 13, then I'd sell it. My dad, every day, he'd look, check in the paper and see what the stock was and write it down, but he'd never buy any stock himself because he knew what happened to his dad during the Depression.
By the way, for the viewers, Hannibal talks about Blue Earth County. That is some of the...
Faribault County.
Faribault.
Yeah.
Okay.
Blue Earth County, Mankato's in the middle of that.
Well, Faribault, same thing. It's some of the richest farmland you can find.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Clarion Webster soil. It's the richest county in Minnesota. So
you see it. You see that soil, you'll never forget it.
the earth's so rich, the city grows, I think is what the label they have on it there. So, and they call it Blue Earth because they thought there was copper in it because of the color. Some places where they had soil that color, there'd be copper, but they never found any. It's just, that's the way it was in the banks of the Blue Earth River. So, yeah, my dad was named John, and my son's named John, but I just lost 2 years ago from COVID. But so I kind of went as Hannibal, and it just got to be a lot easier. People wouldn't be screwing things up all the time. Like I say, I've been married to my wife Roberta now, Robbie, for 41 years, and I think she's only called me John once, and she was really mad at me then. I deserved it. So.
Well, I'm not mad at you, Hannibal.
Okay.
So, yeah, 2 years ago, man, it's been rough, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know,
Worst thing can happen to lose a child.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.